So, what could be a long-lasting solution for Western Cape's increasing violent crimes? To help us answer that, I'm joined by researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute, Dr. Jean Redpath. Dr. Redpath, thank you so much for joining us. So, first of all, you know, this first story about Khayelitsha, the police station, that's just simply not been built. It's such a crime-ridden area. Why is it not a priority?
It really is a very good question, and I think we were able to partly answer that question through the Khayelitsha Commission and the subsequent court case. The root of the problem seems to be the way in which SAPS calculates how resources should be distributed across the country. And there are some flaws in that formula, the major one being that it relies on reported crime. So if people have become disillusioned with policing and are not reporting crime, then resources allocated to that area will consequently diminish. And we were able to show that this is part of the problem. And what you have is the perverse situation in the Western Cape where the areas with the highest murder rate, which is less susceptible to reporting because generally there's a body and authorities note the murder, it doesn't have to be reported by the public. Areas with the highest murder rates have the lowest per capita policing rates, which is the inverse of what you would hope would happen when you're looking across spatial areas.
I mean, it sounds ridiculous, actually, because, you know, if there's a high murder rate, it's clear there's a massive problem in an area. And why have this Commission of Inquiry, the Khayelitsha Commission of Inquiry that you reference, which in 2014 said they desperately need a police station? It looks less like confusion and more like a deliberate inaction. Is there an element of that?
Well, I think when it comes to building police stations, that's a long-term process. And in fact, over the last 20 years, SAPS has built about 25 only, if I remember correctly. But at the same time, some others were burnt down by the community who was dissatisfied. So, you know, we have this situation where things take a long time when it comes to building police stations. What takes a lot less time is prioritizing your best resources, your best detectives, and making sure that the majority of the people that you do have are doing good work and shuffling things around with what you do have. So yes, a new police station in the long term is something that we want, but if the 139 figure that we heard now is correct for Harare, at the time of the commission it was 111 per 100,000, so it's a slight increase, but it's nowhere near the kind of median figure that we see, which is normal for the rest of South Africa. So the area is still under-resourced, and there's no excuse for that.
So, to what extent does politics play a role? I mean, the Western Cape is run by the Democratic Alliance, and the national government, of course, is an ANC government. Does that get in the way of proper policing, or not at all?
Well, I think if we look at the figures across the country, we see these anomalies happening across the country. So to ascribe a political motive would be quite difficult, and certainly that's often the suspicion, and it's often raised by the opposition, the official opposition, as a possible reason. But in fact, the lowest resourced parts of the country are the deep rural areas of KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape, which are political stalwarts of the ANC, or at least in the Eastern Cape. And so, you know, the narrative doesn't quite hold up from that point of view. It is a formula which they are blindly applying and not looking for the problems, even though the problems have now been pointed out both in the Khayelitsha Commission and in the court case. And so there really is a need to revise that formula, to realize that the long-term trend in South Africa, in fact, has been since about 2011 for murder to be incrementally increasing steadily, while at the same time fewer and fewer crimes are reported. And the only way to square that is to look at victimization surveys, which say people feeling less safe, they trust the police. The only way to understand it is that crime is being less reported. So you cannot base everything on reported crime, which is currently what SAPS is doing.
And then the interesting story from Langa, where basically they're using social media shaming of suspected victims. I mean, that's just a small leap before we see vigilante attacks. And we all remember People Against Gangsterism and Drugs. It started out, it seemed like a good community initiative, and then it ended up with a public burning of Rashad Stahi, I think it was back in the 90s. So vigilantism attacks are on the increase, not just in the Western Cape. But is that where we are heading? Is that the more and more communities feel that they are not looked after by the police, the more and more they feel we're on our own, we have to do it ourselves?
Certainly, we're already there. Something like between 3,000 and 5,000 murders every year are vigilante murders. And that's a big proportion of our murders. And it's particularly in places where people have given up on policing and are taking the law into their own hands. And yes, it will get worse. And that is a very, very scary prospect for the rule of law in our country. And it's one of the reasons why this is such an urgent matter.
What is the solution? I mean, I'm thinking it's not just building the police stations where they're needed. It's so much more detailed than that, and it's not just about getting more bobbies on the beat. It's probably also about networks of interventions throughout a community that is in distress.
Certainly, we know that all sorts of social methods, social crime prevention methods need to be adopted. And South Africa as a nation, we're doing very well in bringing down violence over the period up until about 2009, 2010. So we've done it before. We can do it again. On the policing side, unfortunately, our police service seems to be somewhat in a crisis at the high levels of leadership. Over the last 10 years, we've seen discipline collapsing. We've seen training not be up to scratch. So there's a lot of work that has to happen in policing as well as all the social measures which would need to go hand in hand with that.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time this evening. That was Dr. Jean Redpath, researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape.